afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. So there are more than 40 million people working in fisheries worldwide, with just over 20% of them being women, and many located in developing countries. And by way of comparison, there are 20 times more fishers than seafarers in the world. The fisheries sector provides work for 1 in every 13 people on the planet, whether directly or indirectly. And fishing vessels contribute between 0.1% and 0.5% of global carbon emissions, representing about 4% of carbon emissions from global food production. This is a part of the reason why we are here today. And these numbers and these percentages, this data is very limited, but it is extremely important because this is much more than numbers. This is about people, this is about jobs, this is about livelihoods, and this is about food security. So with all protocol having been established earlier, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this session on the energy transition of fishing fleets, opportunities and challenges. Co-hosted by the United Nations Trade and Development, the Fisheries Division and the Minister, Fisheries Division of the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, Green and Blue Economy Government of Barbados, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I'm Nicola Simpson, and over the next about hour, I will be the moderator for this session. And although there are only a few of us in this room, I hope that we can communicate, connect, and create some change together. So to get this session really started, can we have a show of hands of how many people in this room eat fish? Anyone in here eats fish? Oh, so almost everyone. So another reason why fisheries is so important. In 2017, developing countries depended on fish for just under 12% of consumed animal protein. But in SIDS, in small island developing states, this figure actually exceeded 50% in some cases. And I think for those of us that are either from the Caribbean or familiar with the Caribbean, we know that people here love to eat fish. Unfortunately, the fisheries sector is one of the 3 economic sectors most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis. Every day we're hearing about rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and ocean temperatures are getting warmer. So it's not only getting hotter on land, but also in the sea, and we're breaking records, not of the good kind. It is May in Barbados, and outside feels like September. As we continue to experience more extreme heat waves, droughts, and flooding, with predictions for a very active hurricane season, the conversation, and more importantly, the action on 1.5 has never been more important, especially for us here in small island developing states. Energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emission reduction are a vital part of achieving the ambitions of the Paris Agreement, which include pursuing efforts to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the year 2100. But unfortunately, it's looking like we're going to reach this by 2040 or earlier. As more countries commit to net zero emissions, and include ocean-based climate action in their nationally determined contributions, NDCs, the energy transition of the fishing industry and its fleets is becoming a pressing issue. We know that the fisheries sector is a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions because it relies heavily on fossil fuels at every part of the value chain, primarily using marine diesel energy in the fishing activity itself, but also requiring energy inputs for proper storage, for processing, for transport and marketing of fish produce. So with this brief context on the importance of the fisheries sector, as well as the current state of emissions from the sector, this session really aims to provide a first mapping of some of the challenges and opportunities of the energy transition of fishing vessels in developing countries. The outcome of this session is to define a preliminary element of a roadmap for a global greenhouse gas emission reduction target for the fisheries sector. Currently, there's no global plan and there are no targets for this. So with that being said, I think we're really looking forward to hearing some diverse perspectives and recommendations that could become preliminary elements of a global roadmap started right here in Barbados. So on the topic of Barbados, and without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce the Honourable Adrian Ford, MP, Minister of Environment and National Beautification, Green and Blue Economy, Government of Barbados. Minister Ford, thank you so much for your time and for providing this feature address this afternoon.
Thank you very much. And friends all, I just want to have that as part of our nomenclature, friends all. Friends all, because we are friends here working on one single purpose, and that is to transition our energy sector so that we in the fishing industry, of course, in Barbados, will be self-sufficient, and it will be part of our sustainable development goal. It is known across the world that abatement technology, the abatement alternatives will be not as accessible as we would like over the next couple of years. We who live in the tropics, about 2 billion people exist in the tropics, and those 2 billion persons suffer the worst effects of climate change, the vagaries thereof, but we contribute very little to it. Barbados, we emit about 2 million tons yearly of carbon dioxide. The global picture is about 40 to 50 billion tons. So it's very small. It's a drop in the ocean as it relates to our contribution to greenhouse gas. So, but when there are hurricanes and tsunami activities, when there is sea level rise, when there are increases in terms of the temperature, last year, September the 30th, we recorded the hottest day ever, 34.6 degrees. Never happened in 17 years. We are forecasting over the next year or so about 3 heat wave cycles that can devastate our fishing industry. So the old axiom of 1.5 to stay alive becomes only real if we start to transition not only that which happens in the green sphere, but in the hydrosphere as well, which is the sea, and the transportation and all the other intricacies as it relates to our fishing industry. I think this is an important conversation. In the transport industry, we generate about 1.6 million tons of, 1.6 million tons of carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Out of the 2 million tons, that's 80%. 80%. We see the wisdom in being able to not only reduce from the transport on land, but that at sea. We have started ensuring our vessels have the structured changes necessary to have photovoltaic fits. But the reality is that unless we have the abatement in terms of battery, and to my knowledge, the battery that every single country, because not only Barbados that is asking for battery and battery storage, it is every single country that's transitioning to green alternatives. So there lies the competition, and that is why logistics, supply chain, and demand becomes such an important conversation, especially for us as a small island developing state. It is as important as a conversation as any other small island developing state. It is a conversation that will pretty much determine our survival. And that is why this forum is so important and so vital. So the conversation is really about how we will have the abatement technology available so that when we reduce our fossil fuel, because most of the fleets, I should think over 80% of our fleet or more, depend on fossil fuel. Then there are the biofuel alternatives that may be used transiently until we transition to photovoltaic, because one of the things that exist in unequivocal commodity is the sunlight. Photovoltaic. We have started the transition in terms of our on our buildings and the whole project, and then government and private sector initiatives to ensure that by 2030 we are talking as fossil fuel free as possible. Ideally, by 2035 as carbon neutral as possible. So we're looking at what happens is not only in our housing and housing projects, but of course in the agricultural sector, because we know full well that ruminants produce carbon dioxide as well. And that is a big concern in terms of the methane, which is just as deadly as a greenhouse gas. As far as I understand, it's about 28% stronger as a greenhouse gas. It emits about 80% more heat. That is the danger. So that is another conversation we need to have. In the fishing industry, I can tell you that we in Barbados have small open vessels to larger vessels which go beyond our 200, just beyond our 200 nautical miles for the larger fish, the tuna and the swordfish. So the mileage is there, the coverage is there in terms of the use of fossil fuel. So it's important that we start with that transition. If we'll start with the biofuels first. I know the Chief Fisheries Officer will have her input in terms of how we transition, because we must, as I said, we must have access to the alternative technology. Very, very important part of the conversation. And unless we can have the help of my good friend here, unless we have, and then have other international agencies come on board to help us assess those things, then our hopes will not be as excited as we are today. So that is the wider conversation. I want us to be imbued with the spirit of optimism, and then we provide the wherewithal for our fisher folk to be able to equally transition to having those abatement technologies available. And this is something that we will be moving apace to ensure that it happens. To gain a more accurate view of our fishing effort, we are in the process of determining the total number of active vessels through a remarketing exercise. Based on 12 years of data, the average annual diesel usage at just one fuel pump in Bridgetown, Barbados, the average, and this is data collected over 12 years, the average for diesel usage is estimated at 1 million liters. That's one pump. We have three in Bridgetown, three in total. That's 3 million liters a year. Now, if you look at it in terms of conversion, because I suspect I have scientists in here that are better equipped than myself, you are talking the better part of 10,000 tons, and this is just the emission of carbon dioxide from diesel usage. About 10,000 tons or so, contributing to the 2 million tons that we produce every year. So you see that, and that is just 3 pumps that we're talking. So if you extrapolate across the board, we can have the wider conversation about the importance of reducing even from that perspective at the level of the pump. So if we change on to the alternatives, here is that we are improving our green footprint. And this is an important conversation, because in order for us to have a successful transition, to have that 2030 goal of a fossil fuel reduction, a 0% fossil fuel reduction by 2030, the only way we can have that is if we have the buy-in of our fisher folk and those in the industry. And we are saying that because partnership is an important cog of sustainable development, we are saying as a government that we will be providing that assistance, whether it's technical assistance, whether it is financial assistance through different institutions, different agencies, so that the fisher folk will be able to get that buy-in, because they must be imbued with a sense of greening as well in order for us to have a successful change and transition to greener alternatives. And that is what we are seeing. So the climate change, combating the climate change phenomenon, the biodiversity loss as we know it, and pollution, I call them the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse, because they will definitely destroy this land space as we know it, the biosphere. They will ensure that what happens in the hydrosphere or the blue sphere will be a distant memory in terms of biodiversity loss, the loss of species, the loss of coral, the loss of reefs. I am saying that the fight from our fish folk side and what we are doing here in the fishing industry to transition is equally important. And I'm saying that I hope that the conversations today will be robust. They will be imbued with a sense of understanding what we are faced with, and the appreciation that 1.5 is just not an axiom that comes out of the stratosphere, but it is something that in order to be real and lived, it must ensure the full sinew of every single person in this room and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ford. Really appreciated that feature address, and I think there were some rich insights, some knowledge, some data, which was quite striking as well that you've shared. And I'm also looking forward to learning a little bit more about some of the projects of the Fisheries Division with partners later on in the session from Dr. Cox. And now to kind of continue this conversation, I think you started to really shape the conversation. To continue the conversation, I would like to introduce our first panelist. So our first panelist is Mr. David Vivas, the Chief of Section ad interim, Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development Branch, DITC, UN Trade and Development. David, it is great to be here with you and everyone in this space. And I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you to UN Trade and Development and the team for everything for this forum. The recently launched report, you'll see this if you haven't seen this yet, on the energy transition of fishing fleets. It touches on and dives into trade, economic, regulatory, social, and environmental considerations that could support a just energy transition for fishing fleets with a focus on developing countries. I think that reducing emissions from fishing fleets could also help to contribute to achieving global targets, as we touched on, increasing energy security, securing exports, and more. I know that you all have been doing a lot of work, and I want to ask you to just touch and share a little bit about some of the global trends that you are seeing to support the energy transition, and specifically some of the technological options that are either commercially available or in the research and development phase. So, David, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, to be in Barbados. It's a country that is close to my heart and to my home. I'm from Venezuela. You swim 200 miles and you get there, you know, and I feel like a local, only a little bit lighter skin, but besides that, I feel like at home. On the question posed, and I think it's very important, the ministry already did a great job on trends. There are 2 or 3 points that I want to make. First, we have reached amount of global fishing capture of about 90 to 90 million tons marine species. That's the average of the last 10 years, more or less, according to the FAO, by the way. And that's it. There is no more fish. That fish only covers about 53% of all the global demand. The other 47% is aquaculture. So we reach the limit of the last global commons from wild harvesting. And that global common is not enough to supply the demand for half of the planet today. Okay, so we have a big sustainability problem in biodiversity and stocks. Second trend, we don't have a global plan for the decarbonization of fishing fleets. Why that's important? We all have to make efforts. There are sectors that are more polluting than others. Fisheries is not the most polluting one, but all sectors will have to make an effort. And fisheries is intense. All motorized vessels use marine diesel and other type of fuel. So it's unavoidable. You know? The only ones that do not do are the sailboats, you know, that still exist, but are not the ones that are to be responsible for most of the depletion. It's mainly the industrial fleets. The third point in trends, and this is amazing, I was looking at NDCs in 2 papers, one that we did already for this, that you have it here, and another that we're discussing still how to go deeper, and we'll have a peer review tomorrow. But the first point is, of the 10 biggest exporting fish nations in the world, only 3 have mentioned fisheries in their NDCs. And these 3 were surprising: China, Vietnam, and Ecuador. None of the developed countries, okay, mention fisheries of the big exporting nation, main fisheries, neither Japan, neither Russia, neither the EU, neither Spain. That was very surprising to me, you know, first point. Second point, of seeds NDCs, the number 1 sector mentioned in mitigation and adaptation by far is fisheries. Why? Because feeling the impacts of climate change and very closely linked to livelihoods. We live from it, with it, you know. So these are some of the trends. Now, in terms of the sector, fisheries will be a sector where the energy transition is not going to be easy. In maritime transport, even if it's difficult, it's going to be easier because you have a sector intensive in capital, intensive in volume, global vertically integrated, depending on the country, that everybody depends. In fisheries, we're talking about usually a sector that doesn't have so much capital, and doesn't have so much attention. The second point is that to do the transition, we need to be careful because you have industrial fleets, semi-industrial fleets, and you have the small-scale fisheries. Most of the emissions are produced by the first two. Now, which are the technological alternatives? And this is why the transition is not going to be easy, because the technologies needed to do the transition are not as mature in this sector that you find, for example, for the generation of electricity. People tend to think that we now have solar panels and windmill, and the problem of energy, renewable energy, is solved. This is to produce electricity inshore. The problem when you're trying to deal with a sector such as transport or fisheries, they're talking about vehicles that move, that need fuels due to the potential requirements of the business. That happens also to air transport, for example. So we're talking a transition in a different category of energy. Now, there are several technologies, and I will be mentioning one by one, from the ones that are closer to the ones that are further. The one that is at hand already, it's energy efficiency measures, usually in terms of engines, vessel design. This is already happening. This has happened, and I have the data, it's in the report, mainly in Annex 1 Kyoto Protocol members, developed, rich countries, okay? And by energy efficiency, meaning I take an old boat and substitute for a new one, or I take 9 small boats and substitute for a huge one, I get efficiency in fuel, but also in catch per fuel, okay? So they have reduced over the last 30 years, 40% of their emissions. My feeling is that at some point they will start saying, you developing countries need to start doing the same. So the idea is to have a precautionary approach. Before anybody comes and create a carbon border adjustment for fish, let's be ready, okay? Then the second technology available, and this is interesting for the Caribbean and for small island states, are green biofuels on third and fourth generation. Why? Because you can use them directly without the retrofit. You can also mix them with existing fuels, so you can do mix that already reduce amount of not only emissions, but particles, polluting particles. And you have 2 or 3 interesting sources in small island development states to do biofuels. Number 1, agricultural waste, bagasse. Number 2, you have fish waste that could be mixed, especially for biogas. And thirdly, you have seaweed, that especially microalgae, let's hope we can do with sargassum. There are some tests there, because we have plenty, that can help to produce this type of biomass. And the only greatly available biomass in the planet right now is seaweed. So it's incredible, and humans perhaps, but that's another point. Okay, this is number 2. Then that's area 1, technologies that are available today. Okay, the main problem with biofuels is, and I discussed this with the private sector, there is not a port in the world that you can say, please fill me the tank with biofuels. In port, it doesn't exist yet at that scale. So it's not just commercially available. The technology is there, you need to increase supply, and you need to increase the delivery at port. Number 2, green methanol and natural gas. That's already applied to cargo and merchandise is there. That also you can produce biogas from different agricultural activities that could be input there, that's there, but you need more space and you need a different engine. It's not simple, you need to do retrofit. So it's a different vessel design and engine design, but that can be possible. Only here, the decarbonization is not absolute. You're still emitting both biofuels, energy efficiency, and natural gas and green methanol. You're still emitting, you only do less emissions. Then you have a third option in fuels, and I will go there for engines. I'm just in the fuels part. You have then green hydrogen and green ammonia, okay? Problems here. In green ammonia, you have a prototype, only one, done by Singapore and Australia on a tug vessel that was shown in COP27. There is no prototype in fisheries. The good thing is that ammonia is also used for refrigeration systems needed for fishing. The negative part of that is that ammonia is toxic and you are dealing with food. So you may be mixing, you may be killing people more than saving fish. But can happen depending on how you design, so you have challenges. Then you have green hydrogen, everybody's believing on that. By green hydrogen need ammonia also, but green hydrogen works, very low temperature systems that consume energy in the vessel to ensure you can contain it. And have problems of safety scalability, storage capability, and delivery. Again, if we don't have biofuels, we'll find green hydrogen in a port, today. No, big reality questions. No? This is the area of fuels. In the area of engines, we have some cases. There are some hybrid vessels and electric vessels, especially in Northern Europe, Norway, Denmark. There are some tests, but these are for coastal fishing. So it could be helpful for small scale, but there are issues of autonomy and the weight of the batteries and the charging of the batteries and electricity mixed with water, so there are safety issues. But the prototype seems to be working, only that not a huge scale. Now, another element that we need to think for the future is wind propulsion. Wind propulsion has been there. That's the way we were doing fishing until the end of the 19th century. But that wind propulsion is taking a speed not in fisheries or in cargo. Sorry if I'm too low. You tell me, Nicola, if I talk too much. Wind propulsion is taking a lot of speed in cruise tourism. You have big vessels doing commercial activities of 150 tourists in the boat to do different type of touristic activities because you are not in a hurry. You are enjoying. So the sailing and the new technologies applied to sailings are doing well in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific. Mainly the French are there. Then important things for the future, and Regina will go there, the issue of port infrastructure. But you have all these alternatives, but none is perfect. So all have challenges, all have benefits, so we'll have to calibrate which is the one that applies the best for us. Now, on policy considerations, I will try to make this quickly and then go to the plan. First, we don't have a plan, global plan, we need one, specifically adapted for the needs of the fishery sector, which are not the needs of the shipping sector. Second, we need a globally harmonized system of indicators as collection of indicators for emissions. We don't have it. Thirdly, I think we need to enable research and development and transfer of technology of all these, and we need to invest in them. We cannot expect that they are going to be just transferred by philanthropic means. We will have to engage also in the research and development and testing. I think we need to phase fossil fuel-based subsidies. There is a discussion in the WTO to phase out subsidies that contribute to overcapacity, but the text can be negative for developing countries in one sense. There is a prohibition on fuels, subsidies to fuels, not to fossil fuels. And that was a mistake by negotiators. I have told them 300 times. They are not listening yet. But you just need to add the word fuel, because if not, you won't be able to subsidize the transition toward the renewable energy. So you won't be able to pay for biofuels or contribute. Finally, something super important from the point of view of sustainability. Look, we're having many sustainability objectives. You were mentioning pollution, biodiversity, climate change. We're having competition on the sustainability objective. What is important is we cannot decouple one for the others. So we need to, in parallel, deal with emissions, deal with marine biodiversity, deal with management of stocks. You cannot sacrifice one for the other. They have to go all in parallel. For a plan for the future, all the elements that I mentioned, but we need to have the incentives to do the transition, to facilitate the support for small scale, transfer of technology, and compliance. And this will be very important for seeds because in 2025, there will be a new iteration of submission of NDCs, and we will need to think what we're going to put there, what are going to be our commitments, what are going to be our needs, so we need to go all in the same direction. Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you, David. I think you covered a lot there in a few minutes, and you touched on some of the considerations in the report. I think some of the key messages, some of the technologies might not quite be there yet, but there has been progress. I think another consideration touched on in the report relates to the regulatory regime and framework that could enable a just energy transition for fishing vessels. So to touch a little bit more on this, I would like to introduce Ms. Regina Asariotis, Chief Policy and Legislation Section, DTL, UNCTAD and Development. Regina, it's a pleasure to be sharing this space with you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. It is a pleasure to be here. And thank you all very much for your interest and for coming along. The Minister, in his introduction, made the point very, very clearly. We are on the wrong track altogether. Emissions are going up, they're not going down. Not only are they not going down at the right rate, they're not going down, they're going up. So this is dramatically problematic because we are on target, not for 1.5, we're on target for 2.7, 2.9, 3 degrees. So that being said, there is really a need of all hands on deck as concerns mitigation. That is very, very important, in addition to all the other points that, of course, deal with employment and so on. Biodiversity, also very important. We had this year, or last year, I should say, a marine heat wave, where in many parts of the world, including the North Atlantic, the sea surface temperatures were 5 degrees, 5, not 0.5, higher than average, completely off the charts, unheard of. The oceanographers don't know what it means, why that is. And you can just picture the knock-on effect that has on fish, on biodiversity, on the whole food chain, and of course then the knock-on effect in economic terms as well. So it's absolutely critically important, this topic. Now, regulation. My background is law, and actually I'm in a different division. I deal mainly with maritime transport. We collaborated on this report precisely because the question is, so how are fishing vessels regulated? And while the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, the global regulator for shipping, has enacted or adopted, I should say, last year in 2023, a revised strategy for for CO2 emissions reduction in shipping, if you look a little bit closely, this is not nearly as promising as is made out when you follow this in the news. And this goes for maritime transport. I'm not even talking about shipping, simply because it's a bit woolly on, by when, what exactly, the short-term measures that I mentioned are already in the past. The midterm measures maybe by 25 with entry into force to be decided upon, the longer term by 28 with entry into force. So that is already not that good. But having said that, that's very important that it is. Now, when you look through the different measures that are in existence, and you look one by one, as we have done in this report, and you can read this up, I won't take the time now to go through each of them, you find that either they don't apply to fishing vessels because they're explicitly excluded, or they don't apply to fishing vessels because of the size of the ships covered, usually equal to or above 400 gross tons, in some cases equal or above 5,000 gross tons. That excludes many fishing vessels. And of course, lastly, the issue is, of course, that it doesn't apply to vessels which are operating in the exclusive economic zones of countries. So, in a nutshell, there isn't very much in terms of international regulation. The EU has integrated maritime transport into its EU emissions trading scheme. That is new. But once again, fishing vessels are expressly exempt, with the exception of taxation on energy products used. So what we have then as a picture globally is a regulatory system which could be stronger altogether, but for fishing vessels is practically irrelevant. Now, fishing vessels are, of course, potentially covered under the domestic emissions of each country, so that to that extent that is, in terms of the outcome, relevant. But again, speaking as a lawyer, the interesting about regulation is a lot of people have a problem with regulation. I would highlight the opposite. So policy instruments, strategies, they define and establish commonly agreed objectives, policy objectives. But to implement these effectively, yes, market-based measures, incentives play a role, but it is regulation that you need to implement things effectively. It creates a level playing field, it avoids distorting effects of competition, and it compels compliance. We all know this. We put our car somewhere where it's not, where we're not allowed to park, but if nobody comes to check on you, why not? So this is very important to bear in mind. So if we don't have some regulation, whatever other measures are available, it will take a lot longer. So there is a very significant need for some regulation, that has to be looked at very carefully, how exactly. But basically, it's got to be strengthened. The legal and regulatory system has to be strengthened to ensure a just transition, and to make sure that the greenhouse gas emissions from fishing vessels is in line with commonly, the minister mentioned the SDGs. We know, I mean, we have policy declarations and commitments abound, but to be in line with that, we need to strengthen that. So this is one of the recommendations in the report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. I think because, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind now asking you a little bit more. You elaborated a bit on the regulatory regime, but instead of doing another round, we'll do it now. Wondered if you could highlight a little bit about the report mentioned on climate resilient fishing ports for all activities and the critical importance to ensure that fishing ports remain operational in the face of growing climate hazards and impacts, especially in Caribbean SIDS. So I just wondered if you could share maybe one or two messages on that, if you would like, from the disaster risk reduction and climate smart, climate resilient fishing ports now, or if you want me to go and come back to it.
I'm very happy, and I know we have a bit of a time issue, so we have to be brief. I could talk for hours about this, and tomorrow we will have 3 consecutive sessions in the morning, if you're interested, from 9 to 12:30, dealing with climate change, adaptation, resilience building, and DRR for ports. But that, of course, focuses primarily on cargo rather than fishing vessels, but it might nevertheless be of interest. We've been working on this for 15 years, more than 15 years, and it's absolutely critical to sustainable development, and certainly for the SIDS, the ports. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, in her opening speech, highlighted the point. She called it air bridges, because, of course, airports also fulfill an important role, but SIDS are sea-locked. They are island nations. So obviously, the ports are veritable lifelines for small island developing states. They're critical for all countries to access global markets, but for small island developing states, all the more, including in the context of disaster risk response and recovery, but also for all purposes, energy and food security, all trade and tourism. So if we now focus on fishing vessels, obviously the ports are at the sea-land interface. So and the climate change is going to have a number of effects on infrastructure and knock-on effect on supply chains, but for fishing vessels, that also means it's a different scale. These are different ports often, but it's very important to plan ahead and to ensure that adaptation and these considerations are mainstreamed into planning decisions and operational decisions so that we mitigate the potential implications of impacts that might arise. And of course, in this region, I don't need to explain how dramatic with hurricanes, not fortunately less so Barbados, but for example, the 2017 hurricane season, which hit, I think it was 10 Caribbean nations directly, which was very unusual. And we had a project, and we have the workshop here in Barbados, bring together the port authorities, and everybody was, of course, devastated with the experience. So it's very important to think ahead and to consider this as part of whatever other initiatives are going on. And if you permit me one final comment, because this is what I say in a different context as well. There are important co-benefits, very important co-benefits for adaptation from energy efficiency, decarbonization, and especially renewables. Why? Because in response to increasing heat extremes, like we're experiencing now, and you mentioned that, 34 degrees, it's the wet bulb effect as well. So it's not just the heat, it's the heat index, which is the humidity with the heat, which can be dangerous for human life, apart from anything else. So with that on the increase, and it is very sadly on the increase, you will have a greater need for energy. And energy, that means a greater need for costly energy. So anything you can do to reduce the need for energy and to reduce the cost of energy is going to have these important co-benefits. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Regina. I think you shared a little bit your perspectives on the regulatory regime as well as a bit on DRR, and I'm starting to see the conversation shaping a bit more. We're getting a better picture of the challenges, but also the opportunities on the energy transition of fishing fleets. Coming to you in 30 seconds, Yvette. We already spoke about this. The fishing industry heavily relies on fossil fuels at every step of the value chain, and I think it's important to note that. And as we said, the sector lacks comprehensive global targets and guidelines for this shift. So Yvette, I would like to introduce Dr. Yvette Diawedi, the Fishery and Aquaculture Officer and WCAFC Secretary at FAO. Yvette, thank you for your time and thank you for being here. If you could maybe share a little bit on how FAO is supporting the establishment of a globally harmonized system for data collection, monitoring and reporting of the sizes of fishing fleets and their emissions. We talked a little bit earlier on the importance of data. So if you could maybe share a little bit more about that with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Please allow me to give a bit of context. FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, has within the UN the mandate for fisheries and aquaculture. And it's governing bodies, one of its governing bodies, which is the FAO Committee on Fisheries, the COFI, is the only global intergovernmental forum where the 195 members of FAO review and consider issues and challenges related to fisheries and aquaculture. And this framework sets standards and principles that are globally applied, enforced by members and also the regional fishery body. WCAFC, which is the Western Central Atlantic Fishery Commission, I have the honor to coordinate here in the region. It has 33 members plus the European Union. For instance, has set a data collection reference framework driven from what has been established as principle and standards coming out of COFI. So this speaks about facilitating the harmonization of data collection, analysis, the reporting, the monitoring of data. The question has two parts. The part on fishing fleet size and the one on emission. That one, I will reply to the last one quick because that one is quicker. So far, this is not a work that we are currently doing in terms of emission calculation for fishing fleet. It doesn't mean that it's not a big deal for FAO, no. If the resources are available, and you were yesterday at the opening everywhere, and also today, all the session mentioning the financial resources, if they are available, FAO will be more than eager to engage in this transformative partnership as we used to do with IMO, with UNCTAD, to engage in these fishing vessels carbon emission estimates. So coming back to the fishing fleet size, on fishing fleet statistical collection and analysis, FAO facilitated the development of data and information on the techno-economical performance, but also the profitability of fleets. So we assist member countries in developing guidance, in providing technical assistance, including policy and regulatory framework setting. We build the capacity for these member countries for the collection and reporting of fishing vessel data. And this information are collected every year. Once the framework that I talked about earlier is set, we assist countries and collect this data every year. The analysis of this data are then published biannually, every 2 years, in what we call the State of Fisheries and Aquaculture, SOFIA. The next SOFIA will, I understand, will be published in June. That's 1 month before the COFI 36. So thanks to this, we have the data for the fishing fleet size, the length, the tonnage, the engine power. We do have. I will just throw out a few of them. Worldwide, we know currently that there are 4.5 million fishing vessels operating worldwide. For these, we have about 2.5 million that are motorized. Those are the ones which are concerned by this issue of, So of those 2.5 million that are motorized, 80% they have a length of less than 12 meters. Those are the ones we call the small scale fishery, the small size. So the semi-industrial and industrial, whom we've been talking here, and likely the more polluting one, perhaps, that's why we need to have the data for this, is about 15 to 70% for these motorized fishing fleets. So, that's important to have in mind when we'll be doing the estimate of the fishing fleet's emission. So, but I wish to draw your attention that we are in the Caribbean. So the fleet are majority small size. So that's less than 12 meters and length overall. Asia, that comparing to Asia has, in terms of motorized vessels, Asia has almost 3/4 of the world's motorized fishing vessels. So you need to put this in context and see where should our attention be. But as David said, we can't wait. We need to be prepared. So even if our fishing fleet here are smaller, we still need to contribute to this move towards the energy transition. So I talk about the calculation, but Madam Chair, I wish to share a bit more. A holistic approach, because for me, focusing on fishing fleets, it's just seeing one side of the coin. We need to have this value chain approach, meaning on fishing vessels, we need to think of this transition from the fishing vessel in not only on the motor, the engine motors or power, but on the factory vessel, for instance. So there are facilities out there where the cold chain is used, refrigeration, cold storage, even for packaging. What is used out there needs also to be green. So we need to talk about, to take this into account. And all the way down is mean we need to decarbonize fishing fleet. We need to decarbonize fishing gears. We need to decarbonize the fishing port and these fish buying station. That's along the value chain, all the way to, Honorable Minister, if you allow me, all the way to where fish is prepared. To where fish is pre-treated and processed at the landing site or at the fish market, because there are wastes that are generated out there, whether fish waste or liquid waste. This also needs to be taken on board. So, Madam Chairperson, that's the last point I wanted for us to be very aware of in terms of this picture of greening the value chain. If we really aim to achieve this economic, but ecological and social sustainability of the value chain of our sector, the fisheries and aquaculture sector. So thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Really appreciate you making that point, which I think is very, very important and crucial when we're talking about this just energy transition, greening the entire value chain. So thank you. We've heard a bit of the global context, but now to weave a little bit more of the national context in small island developing states, or what we're now calling large ocean states, into this conversation, I would like to introduce Dr. Shelley-Ann Cox, the Chief Fisheries Officer of the Fisheries Division of the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, Green and Blue Economy. Shelley, thank you for your energy and time. It is great to be here with you. You know, over the past few years, there have continued to be many challenges within the fisheries sector, and we've touched on some of those already, the impacts of the climate crisis and volatile fossil fuel prices. And I think all of this justifies the need to further support this just energy transition. But we haven't touched much on this yet today. The report does talk about it, but we need to pay special attention and focus to small-scale and artisanal fishers, which we've talked about, but also women and youth. So efforts towards decarbonisation are starting to be approached here. We've touched on some of the economic and technological considerations, the exploration and adoption of sustainable fuel options from circular economy practices. And in Barbados, like in other places in the world, we've been exploring with fish waste and sargassum seaweed and creating biofuel or biogas from that. So I wondered if you could share a little bit more about the work of the Fisheries Division with partners, some of whom are here in the room today within this space. Over to you, Shelley. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to say it's indeed a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to be given the opportunity to speak about a sector we're all very passionate about. The Honourable Minister, did a great keynote at trying to provide that background context for Barbados. And I want to talk more about our collaboration, but first point to the fact that our fleet is 1,163 registered vessels. We are looking into the active vessels as it relates to getting a better idea of where we're going and what will be required for the just energy transition. And a lot of the collaborations being done first started, and just stepping back, was to develop that policy document that speaks to strategies for greening the sector. As Dr. Diodi would have spoken about, it does speak to along the value chain, but there are strategies in particular that look into exploring these other alternative fuel sources for the fishing fleet. I think we have started some research and development. We have Export Barbados in the room. We have been speaking to companies that have electric outboard engines. But we wanted to first look at our vessel fleet itself. We know that the largest active fleet we have right now is 56 feet. And we started to look in detail at all of the engines. Surprising, a lot of the engines on board our vessels are 20 years plus. So we know that that would present some challenges to get persons to purchase new vessels. I think what is interesting, though, that we've seen good uptake of solar-powered battery chargers in our fleet, which gives us the idea that the perspectives and there's an openness to experiment with renewable technologies and having those engagements with other companies that have approached us in terms of BNOC with biodiesel, rum and sargassum, of course, with their pilots around compressed natural gas. And they are looking at prototypes for compressed natural gas kits on vessels. They've gotten further with the compressed natural gas kits on cars, but there has been some work and some engagement. We will facilitate interviews with boat owners, captains, and so on, so they can do their market strategies. We had a few focus group sessions as well with these companies so that they could be guided by it. I think another exciting thing, which is also a collaboration with Export Barbados, is our vessel monitoring system installation trust. Because when we talk to companies in Canada who are promoting hybrid boats, they were very interested in the fact that our vessels are going, and we have on recorded up to 320 miles offshore past our EEZ, but their hybrid boats are really for just day trips. So we really need to do the research, and this is the data we've been gathering, the length of trips, how long, the vessel behavior as well, the amount of power required to haul in gear, and so on, to give us the best insight to the technologies that would be best suited for our local context. So, lots of research and development, even with us going in more detail with our vessel inspections, the policy guiding us, but even the development of our draft legislation that we believe will be enacted this year is a dedicated section on fisheries and energy, which will see the development of fisheries and energy schemes. There's also a facility for a fishing vessel energy efficiency certificate. So what this means, it means a lot. It means that our vessel inspectorate has to be trained, and there must be collaboration with the Ministry of Energy and other partners in terms of what to expect as it relates to the technologies, but what can we think would be more energy efficient. What is interesting for us is 90% of our boats are actually manufactured here. So this means that we will have a lot to do in terms of building the capacity for our local boat builders and shipwrights to test different vessel designs and structures for us to be able to adapt the vessels to, as the minister was saying before, to carry more solar panels, to explore with wind. We have to also look at the companies that we're engaging with engines. If you look at the data, most of the time it's either Mermaid, Cummins, John Deere for our inboard engines. And the issues we have with bringing parts on island, this really hinders the efficiency and production. So we have to think about that too when we're looking to engage with companies with hybrid and electric engines. We've also talked about the fact that looking towards the future, the initial cost for charging infrastructure at our ports and maintenance costs will be very expensive. And we have to look and see how we would have those duty-free concessions built in, or, develop these schemes with interesting investors. I think this session was very insightful in terms of how do we think and develop that strategic direction for the just transition. But we know we have a lot of work to do in terms of training. When you look at the space, the education space in Barbados, the Masters for Energy Renewable Technology is in Trinidad. We don't have those. I don't say at the Samuel Jackman Prescott, though, is exploring a e-vessel project, but they are thinking about developing the courses at that technical level, that tertiary level. We have to look at the university level in terms of having persons equipped to develop the technology as well as the maintenance development too of looking into, I want to say, the supply chains as well. We know many of the supply chains are fragmented, just like seafood supply chains are. But how do we go about, we're initially looking at diesel usage, but we're also thinking about how do we keep that supply chain efficient and productive so that, they could actually fulfill this. I think we are looking at, hybrid and electric engines might be a few years out for us, but we think that, the low-hanging fruit might be biodiesel, and we need to find out how can we first look at that steady supply of that, and, even how we go about engaging other countries that could facilitate that steady supply, as well as the continued engagement. We talk about just transition, but, being inclusive. We spoke to women and children and youth. And then, how do we look at these, policies and measures to really include them, to see blue economy jobs as interesting jobs and not, I don't want to say bank and doctors, which are the traditional jobs, but to see these jobs, these blue jobs, as, reputable jobs that they hold in high esteem, and that, once that they have been exposed to this knowledge, that they can see how they can make a contribution to national development going forward. I think even our collaborations with persons on this panel, UNCTAD and FAO, in terms of the technical capacity, even this resource document is very good in terms of really us thinking about it. I think we still are in the stages of doing a lot of research and development where we can look directly at identifying this, but we will need the technical assistance and resources to try to experiment with pilots, because this has worked well for us in the past, even with the solar-powered battery chargers. And even with our VMS, we targeted the boat owners that we knew were most respected and influential, and we got them on board. And once there was a proof of concept, other persons got on board. This is how we go about with our work. So, we would want to, conduct some pilots first, get people accustomed to it, people see the benefits, and then, we get the funding then to scale up that effort and, fully equip our entire fleet. I think Barbados is positioned to be that leader in the Caribbean for the just energy transition for fishing fleets. I know the world over we are known for our unique vessel designs. You can't go any gallery in the Caribbean without seeing a Bajan fishing boat on a boat or in the water. That's something, and I hope that our vision for the unique vessel designs is one that intricately weaves that design of renewable technologies as we, address our trust towards being net zero. We know we have very ambitious targets nationally, and, we think being ambitious is good, because if you don't reach, they say if you don't reach the moon, you still might reach the stars. And I think that is the way that we need to go forward. I think nothing without the support of our fisher folk. When we go about our work in terms of co-management, and this is really key, because at the policy level and the regulatory level, we do have our responsibilities to have that legal regime set up to make sure that there's monitoring, there's compliance. But even before we make things mandatory, we always like to work with our fisher folk to experiment first. And I think that is very key, how we go about managing the resources together. And I know that the engagement and any rollout of any pilot would rely heavily on their support. And, we look forward to working more closely with our national partners. We look forward to working more closely with our regional and international partners. The Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism as well, too, has been promoting this transition, and we attended, Minister Ford recently attended the ministerial conference, and we intend to replicate, but make sure that any intervention is suited for our local context, because we really want to sustain these efforts. So I want to finish by saying Barbados, again, is strategically positioned to be the leader for the just energy transition for fishing vessels in the Caribbean, and we look forward to positive and productive collaborations to get us there. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, for helping to paint, I think, another piece of the picture. And if you don't mind, I'll ask our panelists as well as our audience to kind of follow on what Shelley was saying. Barbados is known for our vessel design. So if maybe right now we could try to visualize a little bit, imagine that we are on a vessel designed in Barbados in 2030, powered by biofuel made from sargassum, seaweed, and rum right here in Barbados. This is the blueprint. What would it look like? What would be entailed to get to this point? And just as we start to wrap up this session, I think that just gave me a really good visual in my mind. Although, we can't predict exactly what it will look like in the future, we have quite a few different elements of what this could look like. We've touched on, I think, so many things in the past 56 minutes. And as we look to the way forward, Is it that we want to create X number of these boats, manufacture X number of these boats in Barbados with this engine, with this fuel, and that will help to reduce emissions by that percentage? So I think, one thing that is clear and that has kind of come out from this session for me is we know that this is a complex issue. This will not be a straightforward transition at all. We are trying to balance social considerations with environmental considerations. We touched a little bit on, finding that balance between people and planet. We want to ensure that we are protecting fish stocks, that we are conserving natural resources, but we're also trying to make money here. We're also trying to do this. We're trying to do that. So it really is not straightforward at all. But I think as developing countries continue to realize the potential of their ocean economies and that the role of the ocean climate nexus is at the fore, this transition also plays a pivotal role in this space. And as many of us gear up for the SIDS4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda in just a few days, I hope that this session has also been a stepping stone to that and more broadly been a contribution to the ocean economy and another pathway to try to achieve the sustainable development goals. So I think we have some potential elements of a global plan that is hopefully development friendly and started right here in Barbados. Maybe this will be the blueprint. We touched on greening the entire value chain, and there's an urgent need to green the blue. And I think hopefully in Barbados and the Caribbean, we can be a representative, as we often are for many other SIDS, in charting this way forward, being precautionary and kind of getting ahead of the game. So I just wanted to thank, first of all, Minister Ford. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the feature address, which was really rich, as well as to all of the esteemed panelists. An hour is never enough time. There's so many things going on in my head right now, and we want this to be a conversation that, of course, leads to action. And thank you as well to our participants and everyone behind the scenes for kind of journeying with us on this, hopefully, vessel designed in Barbados. And I don't know if anyone else from the panel wants to provide any other closing. I don't know if you want any other closing remarks before we officially wrap up.
No, just to say that if you finally get a vessel running on rum, I'm on board immediately. So thank you.
Because they're not going to kick us out yet. There's a coffee break. I mean, soon, but not yet. What was your comment or your question? What was your comment or your question?
My name is Andre.
Afternoon, Andre.
President of Fishermen, yes, of course, my name is very limited. I'm here to discuss the whole fishing industry. I just came off from fishing about 4 weeks ago to online. Okay? So the points made here, because you journey. So the points you made, we're going to just be quick. Okay? Don't want to take up the bite all the time. So you mentioned about green methanol fuel. That's a greenhouse gas. Methanol is a greenhouse gas that causes the earth to get hotter. Just like energy fuel gives off greenhouse gases to 55,000 of methanol split in terms of ships. Okay? You also want to talk about green ammonia. Very, very deadly fuel. It's an acid chemical itself that if the engineer on fishing what works on it, you're going to get burned. Okay? A very serious fuel burn. That is going to be problems. Okay? We talk about electric systems, using electric vessels, but that is a problem as well because with the lithium-ion battery on a fishing vessel, it's going to catch a fire. If it gets water on it, it's going to catch a fire. Okay? We talk biodiesel. Biodiesel can work, yes, but the problem with biodiesel is that there's some particles that blocks up the fuel lines and the intake system of the diesel engine, which is a problem. We have seen it in the UK, in the US with biodiesel in the past. These are the kind of problems of itself with some of these fuels that we're looking at. Hydrogen is a very deadly fuel. The Lindenberg. Anybody remember Lindenberg? Google, do YouTube and go on the Lindenberg situation. That's the airship back in the 1930s.
Wait, Andre, I'm really glad that you're here, as someone that is in the industry. You're the voice of the fisher folk, and I think you've touched on many of the things that may not work, but I'd be really interested to hear, what you think will work. So Andre, if you want to, I think Andre, if you could share, we could talk about it, what you think may work for the sector. So thank you.